I was literally shocked when I was scrolling through TikTok the other morning, drinking my tea, because yes, I drink tea now. Living in London for the past year and a half has completely changed me, and I kept seeing video after video of Americans having absolute meltdowns. And I mean full on weeping in their cars meltdowns. The headlines were screaming that Europe is actively banning American tourists, that we are being rejected, that our summer trips to the Amalfi Coast are cancelled. And honestly, we need to talk about this right now because the narrative we are being fed back home is completely missing the mark and it is driving me crazy. Here's the truth: Europe is not locking the gates and throwing away the key. But the golden era of the American tourist waltzing into Europe, loudly demanding iced coffee and treating ancient cities like a giant interactive Disneyland? Yeah, that era is officially over, and it is about time. When you live outside the American bubble, you start to see us through the eyes of the rest of the world. And let me tell you, it is a humbling, sometimes incredibly embarrassing experience. In the US, we would never even think twice about our right to be somewhere. We are taught from birth that our money buys us the right to exist, loudly, comfortably, and unapologetically wherever we choose to drop our tourist dollars. But living in the UK has completely shattered that illusion for me. We need to completely shuffle the deck on how we view this so-called rejection, because the first thing we have to unpack isn't the new visa laws or the entry fees. The first thing we have to unpack is the deep psychological theme park mentality that Americans bring to Europe, and why locals are literally fighting back in the streets. Also, this is exactly the kind of thing I go much deeper on with members, so join the membership below. That's where I share the extra stories, the more personal thoughts, and the bits I don't always put in the public videos. Let's talk about the protests. I was reading the news last week, and there were front-page photos of locals in Barcelona armed with water guns. They were literally walking up to outdoor cafes and spraying tourists, many of them Americans, while chanting for them to go home. In the US, we would never ever see this. If 1 million tourists flood into Florida or New York, the local government throws a parade. We view tourists entirely as walking dollar signs. Capitalist expansion is our love language. But in Europe, the psychological makeup of a city is fundamentally different. Europeans view their cities as living, breathing communities. They value their quality of life, their quiet Sundays, their neighborhood bakeries, and their social cohesion over unchecked profit. Americans come in with this incredibly ingrained habit of treating these spaces like immersive theme park exhibits created specifically for our entertainment. We walk through the ancient, narrow streets of Venice or the historic squares of Florence as if the locals are Disney cast members hired to make our vacation magical. We completely forget that people actually live there. That woman trying to cross the cobblestone street with her groceries, she isn't a paid extra in your romantic Roman holiday movie. She's a tired nurse trying to get home from a 12-hour shift. This theme park mentality leads to a massive, staggering lack of respect for the physical and social environment. And oh my gosh, the noise. We have to talk about the noise. I have to confess something. When I first moved to London, I had a friend visit from the States. We were on the tube, just chatting, catching up, having a totally normal conversation like we would in a coffee shop back in Chicago. Suddenly, I looked around the train carriage, and every single British person was glaring at us. It was that classic, silent, withering British stare. I realized in that moment that our voices were literally bouncing off the walls. Why are Americans so loud? It's not because we are inherently bad people, though I know it feels that way to the locals. It actually comes from our geography and our infrastructure. In the US, everything is massive. We have giant houses, wide open spaces, sprawling suburbs, and enormous restaurants with incredibly high ceilings. We spend most of our time isolated in our own personal cars. We literally have to project our voices just to fill the physical space around us. Now, I know exactly what the counter-argument is. I hear it from my friends and family back home all the time. They say, "But Olivia, Europe's economy relies on our tourism. They need our money. They should be thanking us." We need to obliterate this myth right now, because while tourism is a massive chunk of the GDP for countries like Greece, Spain, and Italy, the reality of modern tourism economics is much, much darker. This brings us to the Airbnb crisis, which is the structural detail driving so much of the anger towards us. And speaking of this, let's finally address the elephant in the room. The legal and structural wall that Europe is building, the very thing that is causing all those TikTok meltdowns. We have to talk about ETIAS. ETIAS stands for the European Travel Information and Authorization System. Starting very soon, American citizens will no longer be able to just hop on a plane, flash their blue passport, and stroll through customs in the Schengen zone without prior approval. You are going to have to apply online, pay a fee of about €7, and essentially ask for permission to enter. Now, technically, legally speaking, it is a visa waiver, not a full traditional visa. But to the average American who has never ever had to ask permission to go anywhere in the Western world, it feels like a massive personal rejection. People are acting like this is an attack on our freedom. But we need to look at the reality here. For decades, Europe has allowed Americans completely borderless entry. Meanwhile, the United States has enforced incredibly strict, rigorous, and expensive visa requirements for many European citizens, and absolutely grueling, humiliating processes for the rest of the world. Europe is essentially just leveling the playing field. They are looking at their own security, their own borders, and deciding that just because you have an American passport doesn't mean you get to bypass basic background checks. It is a psychological blow to the American ego because we have internalized this idea that our citizenship is a VIP, all-access pass to the globe. Having to fill out a digital form and pay €7 to enter France is shattering that illusion. It is forcing Americans to realize that we are guests in the wider world, not the landlords. Europe is saying you can come in, but you will knock on the door first and you will wipe your feet on the mat. But the rejection isn't just happening at the border. It's happening at the municipal level, city by city. Let's look at Venice. Venice has officially implemented an entry fee for day trippers. You now have to pay €5 just to walk into the city on busy days. Why? Because Americans and cruise ship passengers from all over were swarming the city for 6 hours, taking a selfie on a bridge, buying a cheap plastic magnet, and leaving without actually sitting down at a restaurant or contributing to the local economy. They were treating a fragile, sinking, historic ecosystem like a drive-through. Athens has had to cap the number of daily visitors to the Acropolis to 20,000, implementing strict time slots. Why? Because the sheer volume of tourists scrambling over the ruins was physically eroding the ancient marble and creating incredibly dangerous bottlenecks. And then there is Amsterdam. Amsterdam's Stay Away campaign is probably the most aggressive, targeted anti-tourism marketing I have ever seen in my life. The city literally bought ad space online so that if a tourist typed cheap hotel Amsterdam or pub crawl Amsterdam into Google, they would be hit with a targeted video showing tourists getting arrested, ending up in the hospital and facing massive fines, with the text screaming at them to stay away. Now, historically, that campaign was initially aimed at young British men looking for bachelor parties, but the collateral damage and the underlying message apply heavily to the American party tourist demographic as well. Europe is actively, legally choosing preservation over profit. And to the hyper-capitalist American mindset, that is deeply confusing and frankly a little offensive. Let's pivot again because we need to talk about the customer service culture shock. This is where the American ego takes its absolute biggest beating in Europe, and it's a huge reason why locals find us unbearable to be around. In the US, we operate on a hyper-capitalist model of hospitality, where the customer is always right. Wait staff in America rely on tips to survive because of our absolutely abysmal minimum wage laws for tipped workers. Therefore, American servers are essentially forced to perform for their customers. They introduce themselves by name, they check on you 5 times, they refill your iced water before you even ask, and they accept insane customized orders. Then we go to Europe. I will never forget my first trip to Paris years ago. I walked into a cafe, sat myself down, and waited. When the waiter finally came over, he didn't smile, he didn't ask how my day was, and when I tried to alter a menu item, he literally just said no and walked away. I was deeply offended. My American brain immediately thought, this is terrible service, I am never tipping him. But living in Europe has completely rewired my understanding of this dynamic. In Europe, being a waiter is a respected, lifelong profession. They are paid a living wage, they get healthcare, they get paid vacation. They do not rely on your generosity to pay their rent. Because of this structural difference, the psychological dynamic shifts completely. In Europe, the establishment is the host, and you are the guest. You are entering their house. The chef has crafted a menu, based on culinary tradition, and it is considered highly arrogant for an American tourist with absolutely no culinary training to walk in and demand they alter their recipes just because you are on a low-carb diet. Furthermore, the European dining experience is meant to be slow. You are meant to sit for 3 hours, drink wine, and actually converse with the people at your table. Rushing a waiter, asking for the check before you've finished eating, or demanding quick turnarounds is seen as incredibly rude and antisocial. When Americans bring their fast-paced, demanding, transactional expectations into a European restaurant, it creates instant hostility. And then there's the tipping issue. Because Americans feel guilty or want to show off, they will often leave massive 20% tips in countries where tipping is either not expected or just a rounding up of the bill. While a server might happily pocket the cash, it actually disrupts the local economy and sets a precedent that locals cannot match, further alienating the locals from their own dining spaces. Also, very quickly, I was looking at the channel analytics, and this is actually insane. Around 87% of you watching are not subscribed yet, which honestly feels a bit chaotic because anyone still watching a video like this is clearly exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. So hit subscribe because I've got a lot more coming. And we absolutely have to dive into the scarcity mindset of the American tourist. This is the psychological root of why we act so chaotic, stressed, and frantic abroad. In the US, paid time off is an absolute luxury. Most Americans get, 10 to 14 days of paid vacation a year, if they are lucky, and there is immense unspoken corporate guilt associated with actually taking those days. Compare that to the UK or the EU, where by law, workers get a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks of paid holiday every single year. Because Europeans have abundant time off, their travel culture is relaxed. A British person might pop over to Spain for a long weekend just to lay on a beach and read a book, knowing they have 3 more weeks of vacation left in the year. But the American has saved up for 3 years, hoarded their precious 10 days of PTO, and dropped $10,000 on a massive European tour. Because our time is so scarce, we operate in a state of frantic desperation. We try to see London, Paris, Rome, and Venice in 8 days. We wake up at 6 a.m., we sprint through the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa, we take a selfie at the Colosseum, and we are constantly stressed, exhausted, and on edge. This scarcity mindset makes American tourists impatient, pushy, and aggressive. If a train is delayed by 10 minutes, the European shrugs, but the American has a complete meltdown because those 10 minutes are cutting into their hyper-optimized, color-coded spreadsheet itinerary. Locals can sense this frantic energy, and it is deeply off-putting. You are bringing the stress of American corporate hustle culture into spaces that were built for leisure and slow living. This frantic energy leads straight into the absolute plague of modern travel, TikTok tourism. We really need to unpack this because social media has fundamentally altered how Americans interact with Europe, and it is a massive reason why the continent is rejecting us. In the past, tourists went to Europe to learn, to see history, to experience a different culture. Today, an overwhelming number of American tourists are going to Europe purely to harvest content. It is all about the aesthetic. We are chasing the European summer vibe that we saw on a perfectly curated Instagram reel. This means thousands of people flocking to the exact same hidden cove in Positano or the exact same tiny bakery in London just to film a 10-second video. I see it constantly here in the UK. There will be a quiet residential mews in Notting Hill, literally just a street where normal people live, and suddenly it goes viral on TikTok because the houses are pastel-coloured. The next week, there are 50 American girls in full influencer glam, doing outfit changes on people's doorsteps, blocking traffic, and peering into living room windows. It completely strips the dignity from the local environment. When you view a foreign country solely as a backdrop for your own personal brand, you lose all empathy for the people who actually inhabit that space. You aren't traveling to experience the culture, you are traveling to commodify it. Europeans see this. They see the ring lights, they see the drones flying over historic monuments where they are explicitly banned, they see the absolute disrespect for boundaries, and they are sick of it. The backlash is entirely justified when you realize that their homes have been reduced to mere props for an American social media feed. And honestly, we give ourselves away the second we step out of the hotel. I used to laugh when people said Europeans could spot an American from a mile away, but living here, I can tell you it is 100% true. It's the wardrobe giveaways. In the US, athleisure is a totally acceptable uniform for leaving the house. We will go to the grocery store, to a restaurant, or onto a plane wearing Lululemon leggings, an oversized hoodie, a baseball cap, and running shoes. We prioritize absolute, uncompromised comfort above all else. But in Europe, particularly in cities like Paris, Milan, or Madrid, presentation is a form of social respect. You dress well to show respect for yourself and for the people around you. When an American family rocks up to a beautiful historic piazza in Florence wearing matching neon athletic gear, baseball hats, and massive chunky sneakers, it creates an immediate visual jarring effect. It signals to the locals, I don't care about your cultural norms. I prioritize my own comfort. Now, am I saying you need to wear a ball gown to walk the cobblestones? Obviously not. But there is a massive middle ground between a tuxedo and sweatpants that Americans seem completely incapable of finding. This lack of aesthetic blending just further highlights our refusal to adapt to the places we visit. But let's pause for a second and address the other side of this. Because I know there are Americans listening to this feeling incredibly defensive right now. You might be thinking, well, not all Americans act like this. I am a respectful traveler. I read the guidebooks. I try to speak French. And you know what? That is absolutely true. There is a massive contingent of incredibly polite, culturally aware American travelers who are deeply respectful of the places they visit. And truth be told, when you sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with a local in a pub in London or a tavern in Athens, they don't hate you as an individual. In fact, European hospitality can be incredibly warm, deeply generous, and beautifully welcoming once you break through the initial cultural barriers. The hatred is not directed at the individual American. It is directed at the system of American mass tourism. It is directed at the sheer, overwhelming volume of the influx, the structural rejection we are seeing, the ETIAS forms, the tourist taxes, the Airbnb bans, the water gun protests, is a desperate plea for sustainability. Europe is drowning under the weight of its own popularity. And because Americans make up such a massive, highly visible, and historically demanding demographic of that tourist wave, we are catching the brunt of the backlash. We are the face of over-tourism. We are the loudest, the most demanding, and the most conspicuous. So, what do we actually do about this? Because the answer isn't to just stop traveling. Travel is vital. It breaks down prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. We need to travel. But we desperately need to change how we travel. Living here as an expat has completely rewired my brain, and I want to share the mindset shift that absolutely has to happen if we want to keep being welcomed in these spaces. First, we have to kill the ego. We have to completely dismantle the idea that our American passport makes us special or entitles us to unquestioned access to the globe. When you travel to Europe, you are not a consumer purchasing an experience. You are a guest entering someone else's home. You have to adapt to their rules, their pacing, and their volume. If you go to Spain, don't demand dinner at 6 p.m. and get mad when the restaurants are closed. Adapt, take a nap, and eat at 9:30 p.m. like the locals. If you go to France, learn the basic pleasantries. Say bonjour before you ask a single question. It is a mandatory social contract. Failure to say bonjour before speaking to a French shopkeeper is basically the equivalent of slapping them in the face. It is that serious to them. Second, we need to abandon the hyper-optimized itinerary. Stop trying to conquer Europe in 10 days. Instead of visiting 5 countries, pick one region. Stay in a smaller town. Spend your money at family-owned businesses instead of multinational hotel chains or exploitative Airbnb conglomerates. Sit at a cafe and literally do nothing for 2 hours. Watch the world go by. Stop viewing travel as a checklist of monuments to conquer and start viewing it as an opportunity to observe how other human beings live their daily lives. Third, and this is crucial, leave the TikTok aesthetic behind. Put the phone down. Stop performing your vacation for people back home. When you are looking at the world through a screen, trying to get the perfect angle, you are completely disconnected from the reality of the space you are occupying. You are missing the smells, the sounds, the nuance of the culture, and more importantly, you are annoying the absolute life out of everyone around you who is just trying to go about their day. The truth is, Europe is setting boundaries, and honestly, good for them. It is about time. The introduction of ETIAS, the implementation of tourist taxes, the crackdowns on short-term rentals. These are the growing pains of a continent trying to save its soul from being completely consumed by mass tourism. For Americans, this feels like a rejection, a harsh slap in the face, but it's actually an invitation. It is an invitation to elevate our behavior. It is an invitation to stop acting like entitled consumers and start acting like global citizens. When I first moved to the UK, I was constantly frustrated by the differences. I miss the convenience of America, the massive grocery stores, the overly enthusiastic customer service, the sheer ease of getting exactly what I wanted, exactly when I wanted it. But over the past year and a half, I have realized that the convenience of America comes at the cost of community. The hyper-individualism that makes the US so economically powerful also makes us incredibly lonely and isolated. In Europe, the friction, the slower pace, the lack of convenience, it forces you to interact with your community. It forces you to slow down, to wait your turn, to acknowledge the humanity of the people around you. When Americans come to Europe and try to bulldoze through that friction with money and volume, we are destroying the very thing we traveled thousands of miles to experience. We are turning beautiful, complex, ancient societies into hollowed-out amusement parks. The protests in Barcelona, the bans in Amsterdam, the eye rolls on the London Tube, these are all symptoms of a deeper cultural allergy to the American way of moving through the world. We have to do better. We have to be quieter, more observant, more respectful, and vastly more humble. The era of the ugly American tourist is facing an extinction-level event orchestrated by the municipal governments of Europe. The blue passport is no longer a shield against bad behavior. We are being asked to step up, to pay our fair share, to respect the local housing markets, to quiet down, and to remember that the rest of the world does not exist solely for our entertainment. I used to think the world was America's playground. I was literally shocked to find out it's not. But honestly, learning how to be a guest, learning how to step back and just observe has been the most beautiful and rewarding experience of my life. It's time we all learnt that lesson before the doors to Europe close on us completely.